African countries are doing they're doing quite a lot to try to combat climate change, and the role of both the public and the private sector cannot be overemphasized. The governments in the public sector has continued to take a key leading role on issues of putting in place mechanisms, frameworks, policies, and as well as funding mitigation and adaptation activities. And in the East African countries, many speakers have mentioned what has been put in place. What, in my opinion, is still short is the role of the private sector.
You do point out that African countries are doing quite a lot in mainstreaming climate change in their development policies. However, you think that the role of private sector is missing. You lay out some criteria or some basic conditions, to enable successful mainstreaming of climate change in policy making. You suggest that climate change should be part of the national planning and that there should be a national action plan. You also suggest that it should also be part of the legislative process and also of the national planning and budgetary planning processes. You also believe that the private sector should play a key catalytic role. Thank you very much.
Concentrated on agriculture because that is, my opinion, is one of the areas that needs action, and given the dependence on agriculture and given the fact that, of course, in the next 50 to 100 years, I expect that there will be a structural transformation. But in the near term, the fact of the matter is that the majority of our people will still be engaged in agriculture for employment and sustenance. So in the near term, in the next 20 to 30 years, we will still need to focus on agriculture. And in the long term, I think we should be thinking of how we can help farmers to transition from agriculture. But of course, that cannot happen now because the conditions are not right.
You do re-emphasize the strategic role of agriculture in Africa in terms of employment, also food security, but you also observe that the role of agriculture in spearheading economic transformation will be very slow, that we probably need to still really look and invest in this sector. You recognize that there are a number of ways, a number of issues to do with farmers that have been resisting change. You call for maybe further investigation to understand what the reason might be. You also point out that there are significant market failures, and you point to some of the small-scale changes, innovations that can be brought to this sector, such as, for instance, in harnessing or harvesting water, small-scale technologies that can be implemented at the farm level. Thank you.
So as we've seen in Ethiopia, we have droughts, we have floods. There is no mean. Sometimes it's actually bimodal. How do we plan and how do we build systems for that climate resilience? If we prepare for that climate variability, we will be ready for climate change. And that preparing for that requires capacity building in terms of the data on the hydromet systems, which is usually forgotten, and also engineering, education, and scientific education to provide the expertise that's needed to do that development.
You do point out that in addition to climate change, population growth and urbanization ought to also be taken into consideration as potential risk areas, especially as as these we call for growing development and extension of infrastructure, and so we have to ensure that climate change is mainstreamed in infrastructure planning. You also point out that it is important to consider planning horizons when developing infrastructure, that there will be a significant savings in our respect. In that way, you'll be building resilience into infrastructure development. You also, therefore, point out there are other areas that need attention, namely building capacity, technical education, and also developing a knowledge and information base to support decision making. You also point out that there will be differential impacts, that different regions will be impacted differently, that the impacts will be transboundary, that therefore any solution, any policy approach will have to be also envisaged in a transboundary framework, and also that transboundary institution ought to be developed to support this dialogue.